Very keen to get your thoughts on this decision about Indians or Australians in India, more to the point. We saw it coming yesterday. There's a lot of panic from our premiers. Why should we be being so harsh on Australians wanting to come back from India when over the past year we've brought in hundreds of thousands of people from Europe and North America, countries who at those times had higher infection rates than India does have today?
Look, I think what I'd say here, Kristen, is that firstly, the number of cases we're seeing in India is at a record high. I take the point that they're a bigger population. You need to measure it as a share of population, but we're talking still about 320,000 cases overnight. There's every evidence that this is only going to accelerate in India. It's been accelerating over the last few days, and the things I've seen suggest that the infection wave is yet to peak, obviously. And the other point, I guess, is that people arriving from India by far the largest introducers of COVID-19 into Australia at the moment. So whether that's more people are travelling who are positive than previously during the pandemic or some other factor, I think it's understandable. I mean, remember we shut the borders to Italy very early on in the pandemic, to China, to Iran, to a number of other countries, because we weren't confident they had control of it, and we wanted to take precautions for Australians. And I think we're still in that mindset. We'd rather act on the side of prudence here and take decisions if necessary. We'll review this on the 15th of May. It might be that we can ease it up then, but I think we're better off staying ahead of this rather than letting the disease get ahead of us.
Now, early in the pandemic, there were people criticising Australia for being racist in stopping flights in from China and perhaps Iran as well. Now, I defended the government then because it was obviously a necessity. But since then, of course, we've put in strong quarantine. That was the early stages of the pandemic. We hadn't properly established quarantine. We've now had quarantine running for over a year very, very effectively. And so what is the justification? Because we've had tens of thousands of people come in from Europe and North America who've been infected, and we've dealt with it. Why can't we look after Australians looking to come back from India? We're told in total there would be no more than 10,000 of them.
Well, I guess what I'd say there, Chris, is firstly, our quarantine is good, but it's not perfect, and no system involving humans is. And, nearly all the cases of COVID-19 into Australia have, of course, been introduced from overseas and then spread into the community. So there's always a risk with people coming in, notwithstanding, our quarantine system and everything we put around that. And look, I guess the other point to make here is that what we're talking about is pause a few weeks to allow us to assess the situation, to see how it's tracking in India. And because of the way the National Cabinet works, I mean, this is a cooperative effort between the states and the federal government, and we do need, it's the states that are by and large running the quarantine facilities, the states that need to be comfortable with their own level of risk and their own capacity to deal with outbreaks. And if the state premiers are telling us that they'd like to see this stopped or halted or paused for now, well, I think any Prime Minister would be right to listen to those premiers. Doesn't mean they have a veto, but I think they're an important voice in the room, and certainly they're an important voice around the National Cabinet table.
Well, let's hear a bit from Deborah Tellis, who I spoke to earlier in the program. She's recently got back into Australia from India, and she's in contact with a lot of people in India now, a lot of Australians wanting to come home. Here's what she had to say earlier in the program.
Howard Springs, I've heard, has a capacity of 3,000 people. If it can be cared for by the same way that the AUSMAT are dealing with the health over there, if we can have that level of care with 3,000 people coming into that facility, then everybody will be safe. But closing down flights, what's going to happen? Yes, there's medical that people can get while they're in India. I just hope it doesn't have to come down to body bags. That's the way people are going to come home from India.
Dave, we're talking only about Australians in India looking to come home. They're the only people allowed into the country at the moment. They all have to go through 14 days quarantine. We even had chartered flights coming out of Wuhan at the start of this pandemic to bring Australians back via Christmas Island. Surely we can't abandon Australians in India.
No, and look, we're not abandoning them. And I'm sure they'll get as much consular support and assistance as they can. I know it's a frightening time for many of them, the number of Australians that are over there, but we're certainly not abandoning them, and we're keen to resume flights as quickly as possible. But look, this is not an easy situation. We've got to balance the health interests and the public health interests and the integrity of our health system in Australia here against the legitimate desire of Australians overseas to come home as quickly as possible. And I don't pretend that's it's an easy situation where we're having to trade off the interests of one group against another. But by and large, in this pandemic, we've taken the approach of prioritising public health of Australians in Australia and maintaining the integrity of our borders, mindful of the experience of other nations when they've had looser border controls and the diseases have been allowed to take root in their country and then spread like wildfire. I think that's what we want to avoid, and I don't think any Australian would thank us if we allowed that situation to develop. But I appreciate there's a tough decisions, and then there's going to be a number of Australians and overseas and Australians who've got family overseas who are upset by these decisions. I'm afraid these are tough decisions for tough times.
Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Thanks, Chris.
Dave Sharma, their Liberal MP for Wentworth, fronting up on a tough issue. I tell you what Scott Morrison will do now. We flew jets from Wuhan to Christmas Island to get Australians out of China at the start of this pandemic. We cannot abandon Australians in India. If that's the best they can do, have charter flights to Christmas Island, then they want to get cracking on that straight away.